Hello. So I haven't done a video in a while. Basically I've been doing other things. I mean I've filmed quite a few Nekroz matches, but I didn't post most of them in some cases because I didn't really feel like there was anything too informative in them. It just seemed like a standard affair. And in other cases because like people didn't want me to post things pre-YCS that would reveal certain card choices and stuff like that, because I was testing with certain people and they wanted certain things kept quiet, etc. So but mainly I've been doing other things, so I haven't posted a bunch of Nekroz matches. But what I have noticed is that the Nekroz deck profile has been getting loads of views, and people still ask me about like individual choices and stuff like that. And since then the build has changed a lot due to various occurrences. So this is what it is now. So I thought that I mean I can and probably will do Nekroz matches. I'm not gonna like guarantee that there'll be loads of Nekroz matches on here, but there will be some content up here if I can. But rather than approach it from that angle, I thought it would be reasonable to do an updated deck profile for those of you who are interested, because the build isn't what it was in the deck profile from pretty much 2 months ago, basically. So with that, this is the deck. A lot of it is still the same, but I will be explaining things as best as I can for those of you who are new, and for those of you who watched the previous deck profile, or indeed just know how to play Nekroz generally. This is more of an update. What I have noticed just on an observational level is that the quality of play in terms of people using Nekroz, I mean we're a week into the deck being released, so I didn't expect anything amazing. It isn't as terrible as I expected it to be, but people are still making erroneous decisions, I would say, in terms of how they play. And I guess that the general understanding of the deck isn't as advanced as I think it will become, because the deck is very deep, and it's weird to think of a word like philosophy applying to Yu-Gi-Oh, but philosophically, if you understand how, you know, like if you look at like Magic or Hearthstone as a simplified version of Magic, the way that there are structures in terms of deck building and the way that decks play, like aggro, mid game, late game, and things like tempo and pressure, these kind of concepts, or key concepts really, they are embodied in the deck pretty well. And I feel that if you have an understanding of such concepts, it increases your ability to play the deck to a large extent. And I would say, again, I think I have already said it, but this deck is mainly a tempo deck. It works by responding to game states regardless of what the game state is, and the deck is very flexible in that you can liquidate game states, so to speak, your own game state. So this isn't the only deck that can put 3 to 4 big monsters on the field in one turn, but it's the only deck where, you know, you can put 5k's worth of damage on the field and then remove those 2 cards from the field to draw 2 and turn that field advantage back into hand advantage, kind of thing. The flexibility with which you can do that allows you to choose how you respond to certain game states. So you can choose to go aggressively should you decide it is best to go aggressively. You can do Valkyr and run plays rather than going aggressively if you feel that that is best. And I think that that's really the crux behind how to play the deck optimally, is assessing what the best play in each situation is, which is really weird for Yu-Gi-Oh, because especially now a lot of decks tend to be built really aggressively, and it's just try and kill your opponent as quickly as possible. That's certainly not the case with this deck. With this deck you have to really think about, firstly, what your hand facilitates, but most of the time what your hand facilitates will be uh, relatively widespread in terms of the options that you can do, because the deck is just so consistent. And beyond that, what the opponent's field or lack thereof means in terms of what you should be doing. And I mean, this is pivotal to the mirror as well, because if you just go balls deep in the mirror, you're going to lose, and it's a very basic thing. Like, Valkyrie run plays are the bread and butter of the mirror match, which in turn make it the bread and butter of this deck. But yeah, it's just something interesting to think about. I may do more stuff relating to that, but again, no guarantees. I'm just doing an update deck profile for those of you who are interested. I haven't seen really any of the builds that topped YCS thingy-majig, except for Omar or 902's build, because Omar or 902 was one of the people who I play tested with, so it was good to see him top. With him in particular, he didn't really know what to do with the deck, but then after you know a week or so, from me playing him once to me playing him again, like he really developed a further understanding of how to play the deck. So kudos to him, congrats on the top. But yeah, other than that, I'll just get onto the deck. So 3 Brionac, because you know expensive cards are nice. 3 Unicore, 3 Valk, 1 Clausolas. I play 1 Clausolas, firstly because I don't play Jhin. For those of you who didn't watch the previous deck profile, the reason why I don't play Jhin is because it's really brittle. Most of the time when you're in a position to make a Jhin field, Jhin is obviously very powerful in that if it stays up, it's just a complete floodgate, and no special summoning is strong to the point where it can just win you the game, regardless of the matchup. I mean, obviously it's very strong in the mirror, but against BA and even Klee a lot of the time, just having a monster emptiness is enough to shut them out of the game. So it's a very powerful effect. However, lots of people are rightly playing outs to Jhin, and particularly in the mirror, where Book of Eclipse is more favored. If the Jhin field gets outed, it leaves you in a very vulnerable position for them to counter attack you, I guess, in the mirror, particularly through Trishula. And the whole mirror is really, to a large extent, avoiding Trishula. The main cards in the mirror are Valkyrus, Trishula, Jhin, and Gungnir, really. Trishula to the lowest extent, because in an optimal mirror, both players will be playing around Trishula to the extent that it shouldn't hit the field and shouldn't be able to resolve. But the fact that you have to play everything with Trishula in mind means that Trishula is a relevant part of the mirror. Gungnir, because it stops Valk, so it means that players should use Valks early, should use Valk so that they don't go below 4k, because if they are below 4k, it enables the opposition player to drop a bunch of stuff, and if they have Gungnir on top of that as well, they can win the game regardless of Valk, which in turn makes Gungnir very important, and obviously Jhin, because just in terms of deck building, you have to run, you know, I would say at least 3, but realistically 4 to 5 outs to Jhin, just so that you don't lose to Jhin. But I don't run Jhin because it's brittle. It isn't that difficult to break up. Lots of people are running outs to Jhin, which means in turn that that going into Jhin is rarely safe. And I feel that if you do have Jhin, oftentimes it will force you into thinking that you should go for Jhin. What I noticed just from playing against people that did use Jhin was that they would often go into Jhin when they didn't necessarily have to, or it wasn't necessarily the optimal thing to do, just out of tendency, like, well, I can go into Lavalval Chain into Jhin rather than Rhapsody banish their stuff, or Daigusto kind of thing, which I think is generally suboptimal. I mean, the argument for Jhin would be that the deck is a toolbox deck, fundamentally, because it's just so consistent. You can see each little piece without needing to run more than one. Like, you can run one Gungnir, one Trishula, one DA, one Archmage, and still see them when you need to see them, just because the deck is so consistent in terms of its engine. And Jhin is just a part of that toolbox. It isn't a go-to strategy, because it isn't viable as a go-to strategy at this point. However, I mean, that's an argument for it, and is why I put it back in. But the primary reason beyond that why I don't run it is just because I don't think that it's that good at the moment. Against Klee and BA, I mean, BA, your matchup is good enough anyway, so you don't really have to think about running things for BA. Against Klee, it's pretty good, but I'll get on to main decking cards for Klee when I discuss why I don't run MST. But there are certainly better things that you can run instead of Jhin for the Klee matchup. It isn't like Jhin is really good in the Klee matchup. It has its uses in the Klee matchup. And against the Mirror, it can be very powerful, but people are leaning towards 2 to 3 Book of Eclipse in every build. So there are times where it will win you the game, but it will also, like, there will also be times where it will open you up to the opponent, and that's not favorable either. So that's why I don't run Jhin. I feel it's better to just let their Book of Eclipses and whatnot be liabilities for them. Well, not liabilities, because Book of Eclipse does have uses outside of owling Jhin, but in the Mirror it's pretty much just Veiler, and I don't main Veiler, so even beyond that, it's like that they won't get too much value out of their Book of Eclipse, and all their Jhin outs basically. So however many Jhin outs they run, it just becomes dead cards for them, really, or not good cards unless your hand is pretty bad, and then you can just concentrate on Valken run strats, because that's really what the Mirror is all about. You just keep trying to apply pressure with Valk hit and runs, and once they take damage, try to structure around killing them with Gungnir, or just carrying on with Valk hit and runs until eventually you are able to put a Gungnir field and kill them, or they run out of Valk. That's how the Mirror works, really. So that's why I don't run Jhin. And 2 Clausolas is certainly good if you run Jhin, because Clausolas is the one that you will most often summon with Jhin. You'll go like Cycle, get a Clausolas from grave, and either banish the Jhin from grave to something or tribute from hand. It doesn't really matter, but that's the most common way that you'll go into Jhin, or a Jhin monster. So with that, I mean, I've run 1 Clausolas for a while. I don't really feel like I need to run any more. If you need it, you can search it, but generally you don't need it, because once you see 1 ritual spell, the others come to you. So yeah, then 1 DA. I mean, people question DA. I think that DA is pretty important, especially alongside Archmage, just because it lets you remove things that would otherwise be anomalous factors, like fiends and stuff like that. You can run over things, or if they have something in emptiness, then Archmage plus DA is actually an out to emptiness in some cases. But DA in general, boosting things by 1,000 is alright. It lets you do the OTK occasionally, where you have like Senju go into, like, Kaleido into Senju or Manju, Kaleido into Unicore and Valk, and then if you have DA in hand, then if you swing for everything, that'll be it'll put them at, oh god, I can't remember, quick math, I think like 400 or 600, and then you can just Cowboy for game. Either way, you can just Cowboy for game, and that's the DA OTK. It isn't really something that you'll search into often, especially if you're playing the Mirror, but it is something that you might search into, just because it's it provides you with the means to just kill them quickly. But it's more because boosting by 1,000 is sometimes useful to deal with certain threats, and a 3/3 beat is the best thing under skill drain that you can summon. So I don't know, against sometimes cleave, but also, I don't know, random stuff that might use skill drain. You can just go into a 3-3 and that's still often pretty difficult for them to deal with. So that's why I'd say Decisive. Yeah, Decisive is pretty good. Then 1 Trish, 1 Gug, because you don't really need any more. I was tempted to run 2 Gungnir, but I think that 1 is fine. Then 3 Shurit. I think that 3 Shurit is pretty important because, especially alongside 3 Kaleido Mirror, I'll discuss 3 Kaleido Mirror, but 3 Shurit is cool because it means that you can do plays often, which sounds weird, but it's like if you run 2, then you'll often be placed in positions where you have to search into 1, and then that's not very favorable. And in the mirror, a lot of things have to be factored in, one of which is Maxx. So now I see a lot of people not really playing around Maxx. I think that when you know that it's the mirror, you should always be thinking about how to play Maxx, especially for Valkyrian runs and stuff like that, which is why stuff like Archmage is so good, and it's why stuff like Shurit is so good, because rather than having to I don't know, like commit a Senju or a Manju to go for the full rank 4 Valkyrus Unicore play, which is susceptible to Maxx or giving them an extra card, which sometimes is worth it anyway, but a lot of the time might not be. You can just go, like, you can just have, you know, Kaleido, Tribute Shurit, get Valk, and that's decent, like, especially for the mirror, because if they use a Maxx, a lot of the time people will use a Maxx on a Kaleido, there's no reason not to, and then you're just giving them 1 card out of it, and particularly for the mirror, you know, you can go like Kaleido, Tribute Shurit, get Valk, use Shurit, search Brionac, ditch Brionac, get Archmage, swing, that's 4/4, which will often force them to use the Valk. If they don't use the Valk, then you can start thinking about how you can kill them with Gungnir, and after that, just, you know, tribute, draw, and search a Valk off the Sorcerer. It's called Sorcerer now, jeez. Alright, I'm still gonna call it Archmage. So you can search Valkyrus off the Archmage and retain the Valk in hand, because you always have to be thinking about as well, like, how can I end with a Valkyrus in hand so that I don't die? That's also pretty important when you do commit. And having Shurit just means, you know, you get to use Brios more freely, because rather than being like, alright, Brio search Shurit, you already have the Shurit, so you can save your Brio searches for different combo pieces to structure around, and particularly with 3 Kaleido, but in general, just with the amount of rituals that you do run, it's nice to always be able to, or not always be able to, but it's nice to have the facility to use your ritual spells rather often, just because Shurit is the quintessential tribute fodder. And I mean, you will use the extra deck for Kaleido often, you will, you know, use other things for the ritual spells often, but it's nice to have Shurit, because Shurit goes really well alongside certainly Mirror towards mid game, and Cycle, especially for those of you who run 2 Cycle. Shurit goes really well alongside Cycle. Obviously it's the optimal tribute target in most cases, and Kaleido just because you don't always have the perfect setup, and if the opponent has Maxx, then the perfect setup is not always as such, so it just makes the main deck a bit more versatile in terms of the amount of plays that you can make, and is one of the better increased consistency choices in my opinion. So like things like the second Clausolas, or more copies of either ritual spell that I don't run, I feel like the benefits of having them are greatly lesser than the benefits of having the third Shurit. The third Shurit just kind of glues everything together, so I am a huge advocate of the third Shurit. Then Archmage, or Great Sorcerer now. I've always been a huge fan of Archmage, and a lot of people are looking at Dance Princess instead of Archmage. I wouldn't say that this is a bad idea, but I like Archmage a lot still, because in the mirror it's very, very useful. Like, you assume that it's like a Ceteris Paribus mirror. You assume that your opponent is just as good as you are, and their build is going to be similar to yours, and everything is kind of even. That's how mirrors tend to work, unless, like, you know, they have some amazing tech choice that just trumps you. But if they have that, then they deserve to win anyway. But that's unlikely to be the case. Generally, it's, you know, your you're quite knowledgeable with the deck, they're quite knowledgeable with the deck, your decks will be similar. So with that in mind, Archmage or Sorcerer does very much help with that because it allows you to gain like incremental, always does this, incremental little bits of advantage, and suits the way that you would play, because searching a Valk or a Unicore to re-obtain a Valk is very useful in the mirror. The fact that you can do things with it, like, you know, just search it, or if you have it in hand, just summon it alongside Valk to apply extra damage, and then tribute it and get to search a Valk off it is very useful. Banishing it to mill a Shurit, which opens up extra mirror plays, is also very useful. So it's little things, but Archmage does little things very well. I think that you should be running one of either Archmage or Dance Princess, just so you have something to go alongside DA that can go over the 2-5 barrier should you need it, because there are times where you do need it, and no doubt in a, you know, like a 12 rounds worth of Swiss, or however many rounds of Swiss there are these days, you will end up coming across something like that where you do just need to go into Archmage or Dance Princess plus DA. And I think the reason why that is important is because it's an engine out, so even if you do, you know, like run 3 MST to out Emptiness or something like that, or run as many Jin outs as you do to out Jin, you won't always draw them. You won't always draw them at the right time. And with that in mind, the good thing about having an engine out is that you can commit minimal deck space to achieve the same purpose. It just means that you have to burn your Brio searches and stuff like that on assimilating the right pieces in order to make that play go through. But like, you know, you can say they go Jin into a Clausolas, you can just go like Mage or DP plus DA over it. Potentially they could have the Gungnir or their own DA to back up the Clausolas, but oftentimes they don't, and oftentimes the most common Jin monster is Clausolas. So I mean, obviously if you have Eclipse or whatever, then use it, it's preferable, but there are times where you won't. So I think that is important to run either Sorcerer or Dance Princess, or both. I mean, you could run both. I'm certainly not saying that's a bad idea. And I think that Dance Princess will have merits depending on how the format looks. If Veiler becomes more popularized, then certainly Dance Princess gets a lot of value out of that. If Clifford builds start maining Fiendish Chain and stuff like that, like they do in the OCG, then again Dance Princess becomes pretty good. But it's just as things stand, I don't really. I think that Archmage is just better in the mirror fundamentally, and that, like, I don't like using Brio searches on Dance Princess a lot. Yeah, I just think that Archmage is better for the mirror, but that depends. I mean, the deck can change in so many ways, the format can change in so many ways that things will progress, and no doubt I will keep up to date and post if things do progress. Then 3 Maxx. I prefer Maxx to Veiler because it isn't completely useless against Clifford. So Veiler's really good in the mirror. It's really good, but it's just awful to have against Clifford. And Maxx is very good in the mirror. I would say, like, to compare Maxx and Veiler in the mirror is very difficult to do because they both do different things. But I would certainly say that Maxx and Veiler are both very good cards to have in the mirror. Maxx is just a bit more widely applicable than Veiler. Veiler isn't bad against BA, but Maxx is certainly better against BA. Again, you don't really care about BA or anything else really. And against besides Klee, and against Klee, Veiler's just completely useless, I would say, pretty much all the time. And Maxx is pretty bad, but I mean, sometimes you will upstart off it or something, which means that it isn't completely useless. But I just feel like Maxx is more of a main deck card than Veiler is at this point in time, and Maxx certainly punishes players that don't play around it. I would say Veiler does as well, but Maxx I think at this point in time certainly does, because I see a lot of people not playing around Maxx. Still just going like, you know, Kaleido, send this into this, or just like, you know, activating Kaleido when they can only go send Herald, go into Unicore, and then you Maxx, and then they're pretty bummed unless they can drop a Valk, in which case you're still drawing off the Maxx, you still plus off it overall. And even in an environment where people do play around Maxx, it's still a fairly stable choice, because playing around it is just, you know, they draw one card instead of 2 or 3, which is favorable, but it's very good in that it restricts what the opponent can do, it restricts their ability to play, and particularly with Maxx over Veiler is that, like, this deck is a combo deck, and it's a very consistent combo deck, so I wouldn't bash Veiler because, you know, you lose a card. It isn't that big a deal in most cases. But what's good about Maxx is that it does immediately replace itself with a card, so you don't lose any, you know, like, combo factor kind of thing. I mean, you can play Shed Ride as well if you want, but I just think Maxx is better than Shed Ride because it's a hand trap and you don't have to actually physically commit the card to the field, because that isn't too favorable in the mirror. I mean, Shed Ride is the more powerful effect, but the fact that you can't use it going second when you want to choose to go second most of the time isn't great, although it does stabilize going first. But Shed Ride is also pretty bad against most matchups. It's an even trade against Klee in the same way that Maxx is. But it also appropriates MST and is useless against a lot of other matchups. So I think that Maxx is a more stable main deck choice than Shed Ride at this point as well, because the format is kind of diverse. It isn't just all mirrors. But I think fundamentally you should main deck the deck to play against the mirror, because you don't care about everything besides Klee and the mirror, because everything else is in your favor mostly. I mean, you can argue Heroes isn't, but I mean, you main Jin Outs anyway, and Jin Outs out Dark Lore, and Heroes isn't a great deck. This is from me having tried to play Heroes, because I don't want to spend £1 billion on Brionacs, but Heroes aren't that great. You have a good BA matchup, so what that leaves you with is either focus on the mirror or focus on Klee, because the two necessitate different things. And the problem with main decking cards for Klee over cards for the mirror is that the reason why Nekroz players side so many cards for Klee is that it takes, like, you have to side a lot of cards for Klee. It isn't like the one MST is enough. Klee, you know, they have 3 Scout, but beyond that, 3 Emptiness, 2 to 3 Skill Drain, plus all the other back row that they just play. So there's at least 8 to 9 things that you're going to definitely want to MST, and then a bunch of other stuff that you would situationally maybe want to MST anyway. So that's a lot of stuff. So with that in mind, 3 MST, I don't feel that it's enough to actually do anything about that. It's just like the amount of times where you'll have the perfect amount of MSTs to combat their perfect amount of floodgates and stuff, and you have enough stuff to still go in on them anyway, is going to be very minimal if you just main 3 MST. I mean, like, you could main 3 MST, 3 Fairy Wind, or main hands. I have mained hands. I'll do a hands deck profile, actually, because it's just interesting to think about. But if you do main stuff like that, then you can, but the benefits to doing so are quite minimal. It doesn't even the matchup, it just, like, slightly reduces how bad it is. However, compared with the mirror, MST is just a -1 in the mirror because they don't play back row, and, you know, assuming they play optimally, and, like, generally opponents won't set Book of Eclipse and stuff like that, or they won't set their own MSTs, I guess, like, or their Book of Moons. Basically, they won't set back row, and they probably won't play back row because that appropriates Trishula, even if it is good back row, like Mirror Force or TT, both of which are very good at the moment, and are definitely good side cards, I would say, for certain matchups. It's difficult to main deck back row that isn't chainable on activation because of Trishula for the mirror. And Mind Crush isn't that great, although it is alright if you feel like you want to main Mind Crush, but it isn't it isn't that great. It wouldn't really solve the problem versus Klee of getting rid of emptinesses and stuff like that, because you'd have to just like randomly bluff call things if you were to do that, and that's pretty bad. Although it does eliminate Scout, but Scout isn't the problem in that matchup. Basically, you will be maining you'll be maining MST, and MST does nothing against the mirror. So you have like a physical -1 in the mirror, and whenever I play against people, this is Nekroz mirrors. Whenever I play against people that do have MST, like they end up saying it and chaining it to my ritual spells and stuff like that, and it's like that's really bad. And I know that people are like, well, it isn't that bad because you can say it and bluff it. It's like no one's gonna think that at this stage, no one's gonna think that the set isn't an MST or a Book of Eclipse. Like no one's gonna think, oh, that's an emptiness, or or something relevant. Like, oh, I have to do something about that back row. Like you just carry on with your plays normally, basically, because the risk that you have Trishula and will punish them by just going Trishula for them is greater than the risk that you might assess of that back row being something relevant and that you have to remove. So, like they'll likely chain MST to your ritual spells anyway, which is just a useless application. But regardless, like if they do that or if they don't do that, the card is just a -1 in the mirror. It's a pure -1 in the mirror, and you do feel that -1 in the mirror, because in the mirror each card is so important, because each card is an option in the mirror, and having a reduced number of options just isn't favorable in the mirror. Like the idea with maining 3 MST is that it improves your Clifford matchup at the expense of your mirror, but realistically it worsens your mirror much worse than it worsens the Clifford. Sorry, it worsens your mirror much more than it improves the Clifford matchup. The reason being that the -1 of MST hurts in the mirror a lot more than having one out to one thing will benefit you in the Clifford matchup, compared with all the times where they will have their stuff and you still won't draw MST because you're only running 3 MST. You're not running, like 8 to 9 cards, which is the standard amount of cards that people will side for the Clifford matchup. And there will be times where you'll have, like 1 MST, and they'll just have, 2 to 3 things. Like the numbers just won't align perfectly. That is going to happen more often than your MST will solve all your problems and will validate you main decking it. So that's why I don't main MST, and that's why I don't main I don't know, like any other thing that people would main to bolster the Clifford matchup. Fundamentally, I think that you should just build the main deck to combat the mirror as best as possible, which means that like you could totally run like main deck Kaiku and main deck Veilers and stuff like that. Like you can just go you can go mad with all the stuff that you would main deck for the mirror, and you probably should, because then you can just dedicate your whole side to Klee. It sounds reductive to be like, well, just accept that you lose game 1 to Klee and then just try and side heavy, but really, like, unless you main deck much more than 3 MST, it's unlikely that your Clifford matchup is going to be improved by a significant degree. And in doing so, with each card that you run to increase the Clifford matchup, you lose leverage on the mirror, which is really bad. Like it's weird to be siding for the mirror. I would rather just main deck the deck as best as possible for the mirror and punish people who do main deck the deck for Clifford, main decking like MSTs, and in my particular case, punishing people who main deck Jin outs, because the way that I play, the way that the deck is built, does not appropriate Jin outs very much. So them having those -1s puts you in an advantageous position game 1 against the mirror. Then after game 1 you can side, and that also puts you in a better position. While against Klee, you can still win, but you have to accept that it's like 80% in their favor, rather than the 78% that it would be if you main 3 MSTs. and then just side a bunch of stuff. And generally post side, the Clifford matchup is a lot more favorable so long as you draw into the things that you side into. So yeah, that's long-winded explanation of Maxi. 3 Senju, 3 Manju. And then 1 Psi-Blocker. Psi-Blocker is an interesting tech that I think Squiddy first found out about, so, you know, props to Squiddy, although this was a while ago, so I guess it's public knowledge now, but I don't know. The cool thing about Psi-Blocker is that it's good in the mirror, but also good against other matchups. So in the mirror, the idea is like it works in the early game because you can summon it, and generally you wouldn't call Valk because that would stop you from using Valk, but you would call Kaleido Mirror probably, or maybe, you know, like Brionac or something like that, just to try and cut off some of their plays, and then do the usual Valk stuff. So you can use it's applicable in the early game because you can use your own things first, then call opponents' things and sack it with Valk. It's a level 4 normal summon, which is useful. You can overlay with it afterwards, and in general just swing for a little bit of extra damage and cut off their early game, which enables you to gain an incremental bit of advantage and control the tempo of the game. But it's also good, you know, for the same reason it would be good in mid game, because with Nekroz it's basically pre Gungnir range, post Gungnir range effectively. But then post Gungnir range it kind of acts as a second Gungnir, because you can aggro a bunch of stuff onto the field, summon Psi-Blocker, declare Valk, and then they can't use Valk. That means that you can't use Valk during their turn, so if you don't kill them then, if you mess up, then you're going to be in a pretty bad position. But if you're pretty certain that you have game, then yeah, by all means you can just, you know, go all in, summon Psi-Blocker, declare Valk, and eliminate Valk from their hand, which is generally the only form of defense that Nekroz uses in the mirror. But it's also very useful against other matchups because you can summon it, and if there's an emptiness face up, you can summon it, declare emptiness, and then the emptiness gets switched off, so you can just play. And even just specific things like, you know, you can summon it called Scout if you want. You can declare a particular Burning Abyss card. Like you can experiment. It certainly isn't like reduced in effectiveness depending on matchup, because the nature of its effect means that you will be able to apply it to specific matchups should you need to. But it is an interesting tech. It isn't something that I think I would run more than one of, because I wouldn't want too many normal summon clogs. Because like if I have, you know, even just one of the 1000 hand guys plus Psi-Blocker in hand, and the Psi-Blocker is more often than not going to be a -1 until the point at which I've burned through all of my 1000 hands, which isn't great. But certainly as a one-off, I think that it is very strong, and is something that I think we will see around at some point. I think it will creep into people's main decks or side decks at events, but it's interesting to see. I just thought it was an interesting idea. Then for the spells, 3 prep, 3 Kaleido Mirror. So the reason why I use this ritual ratio is because I think that Kaleido Mirror, or Kaleidoscope, I think that Kaleidoscope is the more important. It's the one that you use in the early game most often. I don't want to be using Mirrors early game, because Mirror is the one that has the most use, I guess, in mid to late game once you have Shurit's Engrave and stuff like that to use its effect. And Cycle is more not something that I would base entire strategies around, but it's certainly a nice option to have, and it's something that you will use quite a lot. I think that if you play Jin, then you would probably want the second Cycle, but Cycle is more of something that I will search into should I need it and use it. And generally I will still use Cycle once to twice per game, despite the fact that I only run one. But when I ran more than one Cycle, it ended up clogging and was just not really what I wanted. Like for the early game, The plays revolve largely around Kaleidoscope, and for that reason, I feel like it's worth running 3, because it means that I don't have to run, you know, like a lot of people playing like 2, 2, 2, 2, and it's like, well, I don't want to search Kaleido most of the time. I would rather not have to search Kaleido. So I'd just rather maximize my chances of drawing into it authentically and use my searches on other things that I feel are more appropriate. What running 3 Kaleido, and particularly 3 straight alongside it, does mean is that most of your plays in the early game will just be burning through Kaleido. Like, you will use probably like 2 of your Kaleidoscopes within the first couple of turns, and in doing so, that means that, you know, you don't have to worry about banishing Kaleido and stuff like that. You can use it to assimilate the other rituals that you would want, and it means that you don't have to burn through your other rituals in order to do what Kaleido can do as the one that has the least utility in later stages of the game, but the most utility in the early stages of the game. So I feel this is a completely acceptable ritual lineup. I mean, the 3rd mirror and the 2nd cycle would be nice, but have to be realistic. We live in a world where like Jin exists and stuff like that, so you have to accommodate for that. And certainly, like, you don't really lose a whole lot by playing this ritual lineup, but I feel that it is preferable, because just logically, like in the early game, all of your plays are most likely to be centered around Kaleido. Therefore, you might as well run 3 Kaleido to maximize the chances of you drawing into it early on, and in turn, because you have 3 Kaleido, so you're more likely to see Kaleido early on, you don't have to run as many of the other ones, because Kaleido will, like, after it's used, you can just search into the others. And generally the games don't last long enough that you will regret not having more than 6 ritual spells, but, you know, it's something you have to bear in mind. Like, you aren't going to be banishing Cycle a whole lot, so if you do want that, then you can run the 2nd cycle. And a lot of people are playing 2-2-2, so there's nothing wrong with that. I just prefer 3-2-1. Then 3 Book of Eclipse. The build that I played before the Jin ruling change had 3 Hidden Armory, where 3 Book of Eclipse currently is, and I was very happy with that, because Hidden Armory is good against Klee, so it was like, well, I have something that improves my Cliff Wall matchup, but also serves a purpose in the mirror, in that it outs Jin, and I was very happy with it. But then they re-ruled it, so Hidden Armory, so that Snatch Steal doesn't out Jin. So because of that, you know, like, Book of Eclipse is just the best out to Jin. The previous build has 2 Dark Hole in it over the 3 Book of Eclipse, and at that point I thought it was the best decision to run Dark Hole over Book of Eclipse, because Book of Eclipse is a lot more mirror focused, while Dark Hole has a lot more widespread applications. However, the thing with Dark Hole is that it isn't that good, and in terms of outing Jin, Book of Eclipse is just the best. Like, Dark Hole, if they Gungnir it, then that sucks, and with anything that targets, if they have Trishula, then it isn't going to get through. But Book of Eclipse is always going to get through. There's no realistic way for them to out Book of Eclipse. I mean, like, just Forbidden Lance, really, but, you know, what is Forbidden Lance? So the cool thing about Book of Eclipse is that you don't have to worry about, like, Book of Moon and Raigeki are Jin outs, but you don't have to worry about using them as Jin outs, just because, like, if you have a Book of Eclipse, then Jin no longer becomes a problem, really. Like, as long as you have a Book of Eclipse in hand, then you don't have to worry about anything. But another, like, there are benefits to Book of Eclipse, certainly. So in the Cliff Wall matchup, you can dodge Skill Drain, so, like, you can summon Trishula, activate effect, chain Book of Eclipse, set your own thing, and then the effect will resolve. And that applies to anything. I mean, you can do that with Exciton as well, potentially, and just have fun with that. And I mean, against like BA, it can stop OTKs every now and then. I don't know, but mainly for the mirror. For people that play Effect Veiler can really hurt in terms of like stopping Valk plays and stuff like that, because it can leave you really exposed. So having 4 books, I mean, that's one of the main reasons for running Book of Moon, but Book of Moon is ran primarily because it's just so versatile that it can act as another Gungnir and stuff like that as well. While Eclipse doesn't really act as a Gungnir ever, but what Book of Eclipse does do, that Book of Moon also allows you to do, is lets you dodge Veiler, which saves you having to worry about Veiler. So, yeah, it's little things like that which end up being really useful. Raigeki is there just so I have another Jin out, but also because other matchups, it's nice to just have the ability to just break their whole field, or break all their monsters, just clear the board and then push. So against, I don't know, like Klee, it's sometimes nice to have, especially if, you know, they have an emptiness up and a sack on something, then Raigeki will out the emptiness. Against BA, you know, you can just go Dweller and Raigeki, and that can often win you the game in a weird way. So Raigeki is useful enough to run. It isn't like something I would consider a staple, certainly, but I think that for now it's a decent enough main deck choice. And then Snatch Steal is something that I could certainly see myself dropping, but for now it's there, and for now it's just there so that I can side the 3rd Hidden Armory instead of a Snatch Steal and 2 Hidden Armory. But realistically, I probably wouldn't main it, and if by my logic of, well, you should be main decking the deck for the mirror match rather than other stuff, then some of this stuff, the sided stuff of the mirror, will probably go in and Snatch Steal will probably go out. But for now, I think that Snatch Steal is certainly powerful enough against every matchup other than the mirror to warrant running it, even if it is a pretty bad card in the mirror. It's not as bad as running 3 MST in terms of reducing your mirror match, but having Snatch Steal can just sack you a win against other things, which is quite nice. Then for the extra, I think the extra is pretty much the same, so 2 Arc Light. I use Dark Lore as my level 6, so you can trick people sometimes. Like, you just put the level 6 on top of the extra deck, and they think you're playing heroes, and then you're playing this, so just, you know. Start 2 level 12s. I don't know if I ran 2 level 12s in the previous one. I think that 2 level 12s is worth running, particularly over level 10, because I never really found myself doing the level 10 play, but the level 12 play with Kaleido Mirror, you know, you got Kaleido, send level 12, get blah blah, is essentially your bread and butter play of the deck, or is one of them. So you might as well run 2. There's not much reason not to. The extra deck is pretty lenient on space, actually. It's like a 13-14 card extra deck, and then whatever you want from there. So Dweller has uses against a lot of things. Castel, Daigusto, Diamond Dye, very useful. I see a lot of people saying that they don't use Diamond Dye much. Diamond Dye is great because you can go into it and have a clear field, so it lets you play around things. And I mean, more commonly, because there isn't really going to be anything for you to Diamond Dye in the mirror most of the time, but against other matchups, it leaves you with a clear field, so you can banish to search a ritual spell to potentially follow up with something. So it opens up plays. While simplifying the game state, rather, which is pretty nice. Exciton, because it's cool. Cowboy, because it's actually rather important. Lavalval Chain, I mean, I don't run Jin, but I guess it's still useful to send a Shurit every now and then. But I guess more commonly what you would do is, like, if you don't have a means of drawing into Valk authentically, like, you would go into Lavalval Chain, stack a Valk, and then do the tribute play with Valk to draw into a Valk, or I guess Unicore to discard and add the Valk. Or, you know, if you do have the Valk, you can stack a Maxx just so that you have a Maxx, or post side, you can stack a Veiler, or even Kaiku if it's one of those things. So Lavalval Chain is still useful, even if I don't run Jin. But, you know, it isn't as important without Jin, certainly. And then 2 Rhapsody and Berserk. I think that, I mean, I experimented with other, with a different thing in the extra deck rather than the second Rhapsody. Because I was assuming that the format would be more diverse. But seeing how popular Nekroz is, I certainly think that now is a good time to play the second Rhapsody in the extra deck, just because it is the best rank 4 in the mirror most of the time. It is the one that you'll go into the most often in the mirror most of the time, because banishing ritual spells from grave is very good. So with that in mind, you don't have to time the point at which you drop Rhapsody. You can just drop it. Even if, you know, you aren't banishing 2 ritual spells, or any ritual spells at all, like just banishing monsters can be useful, banishing Valks and stuff like that will end up helping you in the long run. And then you have another one so that, you know, you can use it more optimally. And it just makes your Valken run plays a bit more substantial. If you do have, you know, the all-in good stuff of, you know, you have one of the thousands and can go into both Unicore and Valk for the rank 4 play tribute. Sometimes Daigusto is favorable for expanding your own game state, but a lot of the time it is favorable to just banish stuff from your opponent's grave in the mirror match. Against other matchups, not so much, but, you know, sometimes. Then again, you don't really care about other matchups too much anyway. It isn't like there's a rank 4 that I'm missing out on that would improve Clifford matchup. Like, Ragnar 0 isn't that great. And again, it's just bad to kill the mirror. But yeah, the extra deck is certainly not 100% standard. Like, you can experiment with it as much as you want. Then 2 Veiler, 1 Kaiku. I sided minimally for the mirror because I main deck a lot of stuff for the mirror already. So 2 Veiler, 1 Kaiku is Gucci. Veiler is very, very good. Isn't something that I'm prepared to main deck at more than 1 because it's too bad against Clifford. But against the mirror, certainly, it's very useful. And alongside 3 Maxi, you can really force them into awkward positions, and you'll have defense. You don't have to rely on, you know, Valk so much as a form of defense, and it allows you to play in unusual ways. So you don't have to worry about Trish necessarily, but the more common applications for Veiler will either be stopping a Valk, which will allow you to counter Trish them, or if they go Kaiku for game or Gungnir for game, then negating that so that you don't die and you can counterattack them next time. So Veiler's very useful in a number of ways, and Kaiku is like the Denko of that matchup, basically. You know, you just summon it when you want to kill stuff, but it's also very useful in the earlier stages of the game just to apply incremental bits of pressure, because they won't be able to use their Valks early. So if you do allocate your normal summon to Kaiku towards the early stages of the game, you know, you can do a hit and run with Kaiku and Valk, banish stuff from their grave, they can't negate it, and then they're in Gungnir range, which is very useful. But it's more just as a kill option late game. I mean, Kaiku's just a safe normal summon anyway because they can't Trish it, but then again, it isn't really that safe because Eclipse exists. So there isn't really any safe normal summon. Its primary use just is to kill them towards the late stages of the game. Then the Clifford side, so I'll start with 3 MST and 3 Fairy Wind because I think that that's pretty much staple. 3 MST is important just because MST is good against a wide number of matchups. So just because the 3rd MST solves so many issues in terms of rogue and things that you could face, MST is important as a triplicate, and then Fairy Wind is also important as a triplicate because it is truly the best side card for Clifford. It's better than MST, it's better than everything, because the thing with siding MST plus more MST clones, which is what I did at one point and is what a lot of people are still doing, is that firstly your hand gets super saturated with a bunch of MST clones, but mainly it's like you have to draw the perfect amount of MST clones to out their perfect amount of floodgates, and sure, that's better than what I was discussing previously with just maining 3 MST to do that job. You'd rather have, you know, more than 3 MST to do that job, but it ends up super simplifying the game state, which isn't great considering that you're a combo deck. Like, you have to kill the floodgates and the scouts, and Fairy Wind just solves that problem perfectly. It's such a powerful effect. With 1 card, you can clean swoop at least a floodgate and a scout, which is very, very good because you conserve cards. It means that you can focus your MSTs and such on more specific things, rather than just having to bop a bunch of MSTs into a bunch of things. Like, you can hold the Fairy Wind until, you know, they're about to go for a pendulum, or they have a floodgate and a scout up and they pay 100 for the scout, then you can just hit them with it, and conserve the rest of your side deck cards to deal with their follow-up to that, rather than having to burn more than one side deck card and then respond in some way to whatever follow-up there is. Plus, it means you have more cards for your engine plays. So Fairy Wind is very important. Then I like to side those 6 and then 3 pieces of monster removal particularly, rather than just siding, you know, like 3 Twister alongside that. And the reason why I do that is because like the Clifford matchup isn't just their spell traps that are a problem. You have to have some kind of monster removal as well, because otherwise, firstly, your hands are too linear. You'll just have like a bunch of ST removal plus the way your deck plays, which isn't as good a quality of a hand as, you know, 1 less ST removal but 1 bit of monster removal. It increases the general quality of your hand, and it allows you to respond to a wider number of game states, because just having a bunch of ST removal isn't always useful, because they can still just beat you down with things occasionally. And then if you don't have any monster removal, it's difficult for you to respond to that particular kind of pressure. So I like monster removal as a complement to the ST removal. I think that it means that your side strategy against Clifford is more well-rounded. So the primary things that one would side for that matchup would, I think Mirror Force is certainly one of the best, if not the best option for that matchup. It is very, very good. So if you don't think much of Hidden Armory, which, you know, a lot of people don't, and by all means, that's not wrong. Just go to Mirror Force. Like, Mirror Force is so good. Mirror Force is also good against random stuff like heroes and stuff like that as well. So Mirror Force is certainly very, very good for that. Dark Hole's pretty good for that, but the reason why I like Hidden Armory is just because they'll often be forced into like they won't be forced, but the way that the early game tends to work is like Scout gets monster, monster is summoned, monster is potentially buffed through Scout. That is their turn, and that is the way that they allocate their once per turn Scout effect, which is basically the whole resource of the deck. So then being able to just steal it slows them down quite significantly, and if they have emptiness up as well, then in order to they're either getting beaten down by their own thing for at least a turn, or they kill your Snatch, in which case the emptiness will probably die. And you know, just in the early game and mid game stages, it does slow them down, and sometimes allows you to just play super aggressively and kill them. But I think that like Snatch Steal is very, very good in the Clifford matchup. It's genuinely like unfair in the Clifford matchup. So having a greater access to that is pretty good in that matchup. I mean, I've liked Hidden Armory for a while in that matchup. And before the errata, I thought it was a pretty solid main deck choice, but now I wouldn't say it is, because it isn't an out to Jin anymore, so you shouldn't really be thinking of running it. But certainly as a side deck card, it's very useful. And then just 3 Shadow Imprisoning, because I thought I might as well have something for BA, but I probably wouldn't be that, because I don't even know if I would side for BA that much. But yeah, this is the build. Hope you like it, and maybe more stuff later.